year was 1664. On a moonlit Caribbean beach, a lonely drunk woman had fallen asleep on sand near the waters. She had an unbelievably strange encounter with a being from the sea. It pulled itself from water, and it forcefully took her virginity before vanishing back into the sea. 9 months later, she gave birth to something that should not exist. The labor was brutal. She was constantly thirsty, her body rejecting the child growing inside her. When the baby finally came, the room filled with gasps of horror. The child had gray-green skin, small fins, and eyes that glowed faintly. The mother died shortly after. The local priests called it demon spawn. They took the newborn and cast him into the ocean, hoping the waves would swallow the abomination. But the child did not drown. Instinct took over. He swam. He breathed water as easily as air. He survived. Years passed. The boy, who would later be called the Submerger, lived between two worlds but belonged to neither. The Morentities discovered him eventually, but they rejected him as a filthy half-breed. They refused to even tell him who his father was. The humans on land feared him, so he wandered alone. He would often sneak to the surface and watch the humans from hidden coves, fascinated and lonely. That was where he first met a scrawny, desperate boy named Elias Voss. Elias didn't scream. Didn't run. For the first time in his life, someone spoke to the Submerger like he was just a person. Over time, they became friends, two outcasts who found comfort in each other's company. But everything changed the day Elias begged for help. The warm Caribbean waters lapped gently against the hidden cove as young Elias Voss, no more than 14 years old, sat on the rocks skipping stones. His parents were dying. The plague had taken hold of their village, and every day they grew weaker. The doctors had no cure. Elias had heard legends of a fruit that could stop death itself, but only from one person. From the water rose a strange figure, a boy not much older than himself, with green-gray skin, pointed ears, and fins along his arms. The Submerger. At first, Elias was afraid, but unlike everyone else in the village, he didn't run or throw stones. He stayed, the only friend either of them had ever truly known. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Elias finally begged him, "Please, you said your people guard something called the last fruit of Eden. It can stop death, can't it? My mother and father, they're dying. I'll do anything." The Submerger looked pained. "I cannot, Elias. King Underar guards it for a reason. Taking it would bring ruin to the oceans, and I am already hated by both your kind and mine. I cannot make it worse." Elias' desperation turned to anger. Words became shouts. Shouts became a desperate struggle. In the chaos of the fight, the Submerger, far stronger in the water, accidentally crushed Elias' right hand against the sharp coral rocks. The boy screamed as blood clouded the water. Days later, Elias' parents died. From that day forward, the boy who once dreamed of saving them disappeared. In his place rose a cold, driven young man who fashioned himself a crude metal hand and took the name Hammerhand. He would never be weak again. He would never ask for help again. And one day, he would take the last fruit of Eden, no matter the cost. Somewhere in England, 1683, life had not been kind to Gaylord and his only friend. They had no coin, no home, and most tragically, no whores. Just two broke, hopeless men drifting through the streets of a dirty port town. But then Lady Luck, who clearly had a sixth sense of humor, finally smiled on them. Pegleg's creepy old uncle had finally died from some mysterious sickness, and in his will, he left his only nephew a ship. A real, seaworthy vessel. From that moment on, Gaylord knew exactly what he had to do. He would become a pirate. He proudly renamed the ship the Wet Dream and declared himself Captain Pegleg Gaylord. His friend, who had long since stopped arguing with him, simply shrugged and went along with it. No Luck never said no to anything, at least not out loud. Inside the captain's cabin aboard the Wet Dream, Captain Gaylord lounged in his newly claimed chair, his wooden peg leg propped up on the table. Sitting across from him was his loyal first mate, a walking disaster of a man simply known as No Luck. And No Luck had earned his name the hard way. Hooks for hands, one peg leg, an eye patch, and a crude hearing tube, all souvenirs from years of terrible decisions made while following Pegleg around. "All right, No Luck," Pegleg said, slamming his good fist on the table. "We're proper pirates now. We just need a plan. Some treasure, some glory, maybe even some wenches." No Luck gave a slow grunt and adjusted his eye patch. The two geniuses sat in silence for a moment, trying to think of what pirates actually did. Eventually, Pegleg had a brilliant idea. "We'll go to the tavern, the one where all the criminals gather. We'll listen for rumors of gold, maps, or fat merchants to rob. Easy." No Luck didn't object. He rarely did. Later that evening, the two coinless pirates sat at a back table in the rowdiest tavern in port, awkwardly sipping water. As they tried to look menacing, a tall, imposing figure approached their table. The man had a massive mechanical hammer for a right hand. Flanking him was a regal-looking woman in a crimson cape and a towering mechanical suit that moved with eerie intelligence. The man with the hammer hand stopped in front of them and spoke in a calm, cold voice. "Are you the captain of the Wet Dream?" The man with the hammer hand pulled up a chair without waiting for an invitation. The woman beside him moved with elegant grace, while the towering mechanical figure stood silently behind them like a sentinel. "I am called Hammerhand," the man said, "and this is my wife, Lady Amarita." Pegleg puffed out his chest. "Captain Gaylord of the Wet Dream, what can I do for you?" Hammerhand leaned in, his voice low and serious. "I've heard tales of your ambition. I need a ship and a captain willing to sail into dangerous waters. There is a race of creatures living beneath the waves, Marentites. They hoard more gold and treasure than any king on land could dream of, but they refuse to share it with the surface world." No Luck raised an eyebrow. Pegleg's eyes went wide with greed. Hammerhand continued, "They're vicious beasts. They eat Barbies, you know, and house pets, drag them right into the depths." Amarita nodded solemnly beside him, confirming every word with a straight face. "It's true, horrifying creatures," Pegleg gasped. "Well, that's just not right. Someone ought to do something about that." Hammerhand's lips curled into a small smile. "I'm glad you feel that way, Captain. If you help me reach their domain, I will share the wealth with you, gold beyond measure. However, there is one particular item I want for myself, an ancient relic known as the last fruit of Eden. Everything else, the gold, the jewels, the treasure, can be yours." Pegleg scratched his chin, thinking hard. "How exactly are we supposed to get something from underwater?" Hammerhand gestured to the mechanical man standing behind him. "With him, this is Submerger, my greatest creation. A robotic diver infused with magic to give him life and a mind of his own. He can dive deeper than any whale, fight monsters of the deep, and bring back what we need." Pegleg looked at the hulking machine, clearly impressed. He glanced at No Luck, who gave a slow shrug. "All right, Hammerhand," Pegleg declared, slamming his good hand on the table. "You've got yourself a deal, but first I'm gonna need a proper crew. Can't be a real pirate with just me and No Luck." Hammerhand smiled. "I know just the places to find the right kind of people." A few days later, the Wet Dream set sail from England, bound for Spain. After a rough crossing, the Wet Dream finally docked in a bustling Spanish port. Hammerhand had heard rumors of a skilled sword fighter with a strange obsession for octopuses, supposedly one of the best blades in the region. They found her in a back alley warehouse near the docks. Isabella, Octobandit Cortez, was in the middle of a fight. She moved like liquid, dual-wielding cutlasses in a blur of steel as she battled against a group of local gangsters. Crates were smashed, tentacles, actual living octopuses she had apparently released as a distraction, flopped across the floor, and ink sprayed everywhere. One of the gangsters shouted, "You stupid bitch, you stole our shipment." Octobandit flipped over a crate and landed gracefully. "Finders keepers, these beautiful creatures don't belong in your filthy cages." She finished the last thug with a spinning kick and sheathed her blades, breathing hard but clearly satisfied. That's when she noticed the strange group watching her, a peg-legged idiot, a walking disaster with hooks for hands, a giant mechanical man, and a couple who looked far too refined for this part of town. Captain Gaylord stepped forward, trying to look impressive. "Ho there, I am Captain Pegleg Gaylord of the Wet Dream. We're looking for a skilled fighter to join our crew. We're going after treasure." Octobandit wiped ink off her cheek and raised an eyebrow. "I'm not interested in joining a bunch of amateurs unless you can help me with something first." She pointed toward the harbor, where a large merchant ship was being loaded. "They're smuggling rare deep-sea octopuses to sell to collectors in France. I want to free them, all of them. You help me steal that ship's cargo and release the creatures back into the ocean, and I'll consider joining your little pirate adventure." Pegleg looked at Hammerhand, then back at the fiery Spanish woman covered in octopus ink. He grinned. "Lady, you've got yourself a deal." Octobandit wiped octopus ink from her blades and looked the strange group up and down. "Fine, I'll join your little pirate crew, but first," she pointed toward a large merchant ship docked nearby. "The captain of that ship, Don Rodrigo, is a paranoid bastard. He's got guards everywhere. I need a distraction." She turned to Captain Gaylord with a mischievous grin, "And I know just the way." A short while later, Pegleg stood in a dark alley wearing a ridiculous wig of long curly hair, a dress stretched tight over his fat belly, and far too much makeup. "I look fabulous," he declared, striking a pose. Octobandit tried and failed to hide her laughter. Don Rodrigo has a very specific weakness. He cannot resist large, confident women. Just keep him distracted for 10 minutes. Flirt, laugh at his jokes, whatever it takes. The rest of us will handle the cargo. No Luck gave Pegleg a thumbs up with his hook. Hammerhand adjusted his mechanical hand. Try not to die, Captain. Pegleg adjusted his wig one last time and strutted toward the smuggler's ship with surprising confidence. Wish me luck, lads. Papa's got a date. Octobandit gave him a pat on the back. Just keep him busy. The longer, the better. Pegleg strutted toward Don Rodrigo's ship with surprising confidence, while Octobandit, No Luck, Hammerhand, Amarita, and Submerger slipped into the shadows. What followed was one of the strangest nights in maritime history. Lady Gaylordina completely charmed Don Rodrigo. The smuggler captain was utterly smitten. Pegleg laughed at every awful joke, flirted shamelessly, and in order to keep the man fully distracted, went all the way with the man whom didn't seem to notice or care that Gaylord was a man. Meanwhile, the rest of the group quietly freed the caged octopuses, sliding them into the harbor one by one. The creatures happily disappeared into the dark water. By the time Don Rodrigo realized his cargo was gone, the Wet Dream was already pulling away from the docks. Octobandit stood at the railing, watching the last of the octopuses vanish beneath the waves with a satisfied smile. She turned to the crew, still catching her breath. "You people are completely insane," she said, shaking her head. Then she grinned. "I'm in." Captain Gaylord, still wearing the wig and half his dress, struck a proud pose. "Welcome aboard the Wet Dream, Octobandit." No Luck gave a slow thumbs up with his hook. From the shadows, Hammerhand allowed himself a small, sinister smile. These idiots were all just pawns in his game and they had no idea. After leaving Spain, the Wet Dream sailed south toward the West African coast. Hammerhand had insisted they needed more muscle if they were going to survive whatever waited in King Underar's domain. They docked at a bustling trading port. Rumors of their daring victory in Spain had already traveled ahead, wildly exaggerated tales of a bold pirate crew that humiliated a powerful Spanish smuggler. As the crew lounged on deck, a tall, powerfully built man approached the gangplank. He moved with the confident stride of a warrior. His name was Kwame Okoro, and he was well known in these ports as one of the most reliable ship guards, a man who protected honest merchants from pirates and slavers. Kwame stopped at the bottom of the ramp and looked up at the strange crew. He saw a peg-legged captain striking a dramatic pose, a battle-scarred first mate covered in hooks and patches, a mysterious man with a glowing mechanical hammer hand, an elegant and dangerous-looking woman, a deadly swordswoman cleaning her blades, and a towering mechanical warrior standing silently. To Kwame, they looked like a real pirate crew, dangerous, experienced, and fearless. He called up to them, "I am Kwame Okoro. I have heard stories of your raid in Spain. You are bold. I am tired of guarding fat merchants who cheat me. If you are truly sailing for great treasure, I wish to join you." Captain Gaylord beamed with pride and strutted to the railing. "Another strong lad for the Wet Dream. Of course you can join. We're going after riches no man has ever dreamed of." Kwame nodded, impressed by the confidence. He boarded the ship, looking at Submerger with respect and Octobandit with a nod of acknowledgement. As the Wet Dream set sail once again, Kwame stood at the bow, feeling a rare spark of excitement. These people seemed like real warriors. It would take him several days at sea to realize he had just joined a ship full of idiots. With the crew finally assembled, the Wet Dream left the African port and sailed into open waters. Hammerhand gathered everyone on the main deck. He unrolled an old, mysterious map marked with strange symbols and glowing runes. "The treasure we seek is not in the Caribbean or the usual pirate routes," he said seriously. "King Underar keeps his greatest riches, including the last fruit of Eden, deep beneath the ice near the North Pole. That is where we are headed." Captain Gaylord puffed out his chest. "North Pole, eh? Easy enough. I know exactly where that is." He immediately began barking orders and turned the ship sharply south. No Luck slowly raised his hook and pointed the other direction. Afromaniac muttered something in his native tongue. Octobandit just sighed and corrected the wheel herself. Hammerhand pinched the bridge of his nose. "Captain, the other way." Pegleg laughed loudly. "Of course, just testing you lot." Amarita stood silently beside her husband, watching the crew with a mix of amusement and mild concern. Submerger remained motionless, but his glowing core flickered slightly, the mechanical equivalent of a sigh. As the ship finally turned northward, the weight of the journey ahead began to settle over the crew. They were no longer just playing pirate. They were sailing into waters no surface dweller had ever returned from. Far away, beneath the cold waves of the northern seas, the Submerger swam alone through an underwater kelp forest. He moved with graceful power, but there was a heaviness in his chest. The memory of his fight with Elias still haunted him all these years later. He had tried to put the human world behind him, but something kept pulling him back. He surfaced near a frozen coastline, staring at the distant horizon. For the first time in years, he felt uneasy. Something was coming. He could sense it in the currents, a ship full of fools, led by the man he once called friend, heading straight toward King Underar's domain. The Submerger dove back into the depths, his red eyes glowing with conflict. He didn't know whether he wanted to stop them or protect them. Deep beneath the freezing waters of the far north, the Submerger cut through the ocean like a spear. He swam with desperate speed, his powerful tail propelling him forward. He knew his old friend Elias too well. Hammerhand would not come all this way for ordinary treasure. He was after the last fruit of Eden, and he now had a ship, a crew, and that cursed mechanical monster with him. The Submerger had to warn King Underar. As he raced toward the sacred depths, more entities spotted him. Shouts and curses echoed through the water. Some threw spears, others sent hunting beasts after him. To them, he was still an abomination, a half-breed freak who had no place in their world. He dodged and weaved, ignoring the wounds and insults, until he finally reached the outer patrols. There stood Orcarnage, the massive orca-like guardian, arms crossed, red eyes glowing with disdain. The Submerger surfaced before him, breathing hard. Orcarnage, you must warn the king. A ship of surface dwellers is coming. Their leader is dangerous. He knows about the fruit. He will not stop until he takes it. Orcarnage let out a deep, rumbling laugh that shook the water around them. Surface dwellers, here, in our waters, he sneered, baring rows of sharp teeth. Let them come. There is no way those stupid land creatures can reach us. How would they even know what we possess? The Submerger's frustration boiled over. I am telling the truth. Their leader is no ordinary man. He has machines and magic. Please, I must speak with King Underar. Orcarnage's expression darkened. He looked down at the hybrid with open disgust. The king does not grant audiences to freaks and half-breeds. You were never one of us. Now leave before I rip you apart myself. With a powerful flick of his tail, Orcarnage turned away, dismissing the Submerger like he was nothing. Rejected once again, the Submerger floated in the dark water, fists clenched. His warning had been ignored, and somewhere above, the wet dream was sailing straight into disaster. But despite being humiliated and rejected once again, the Submerger refused to give up. He still cared about his old friend, or at least, he cared about stopping him from making a terrible mistake. If he could reach the ship and reason with Elias, maybe he could prevent a bloodbath. He turned and swam north with everything he had, pushing his body to its limit. The cold waters of the Arctic tore at him, but he didn't stop. Hours later, he spotted it, the wet dream, cutting through the icy seas like a drunk goose. With a powerful leap, the Submerger burst from the water like a dolphin, soaring through the air before landing hard on the deck in a spray of seawater. The entire crew jumped back in shock. Captain Gaylord nearly fell over his own peg leg. What in the seven seas? Hammerhand's eyes widened in recognition. You. The Submerger stood tall, water dripping from his body, red eyes locked on his former friend. Elias, you have to turn back. King Underar's domain is no place for you or your crew. The last fruit is not something you can simply take. It will destroy you and everything around it. Hammerhand's expression hardened. His mechanical hammer hand started to buzz. I didn't come all this way to turn back now. You owe me this. After what you did to my hand, after you let my parents die. The Submerger's voice was pained. I begged you not to go down this path. The tension snapped. Hammerhand lunged forward, his hammer hand glowing with energy. The Submerger met him head-on. The two former friends clashed violently on the deck, fist against metal, raw strength against mechanical power. The crew watched in stunned silence. For a moment, it looked like the Submerger might win. But Hammerhand was no longer the weak boy from years ago. With a brutal swing of his hammer hand and a burst of stored magic, he struck the Submerger hard in the chest, sending him crashing into the mast. Before the Submerger could recover, Subwarrior moved in with surprising speed and pinned him down. Octobandit and Afromaniac quickly helped tie him up. Hammerhand stood over his captured friend, breathing heavily. Take him below. We'll get the information we need out of him. Way or another, As the Submerger was dragged away, Captain Gaylord limped over, still wearing half a dress from the Spain mission. "Listen here, fishman," Pegleg shouted, pointing dramatically. "If you don't tell us everything you know about this King Underar and his treasure, I'll make you walk the plank. That's what proper pirates do." No Luck nodded solemnly in agreement. The Submerger could only close his eyes in quiet regret as he was taken below deck. His attempt to stop the madness had failed. Now he was a prisoner aboard the Wet Dream, and they were still heading straight for King Underar's frozen domain. The Wet Dream pushed northward through increasingly icy waters. The air grew colder by the day, and the crew's usual chaos was slowly replaced by nervous tension. They were getting closer to King Underar's domain, whether they were ready or not. Down in the brig, the Submerger sat chained to the wall of a reinforced cell. His wrists were raw, his body bruised from the earlier fight. He stared at the wooden floor, mind racing for any possible way to escape. But the chains were strong, the cell reinforced by Hammerhand's own designs, and Submerger stood guard outside. He was trapped. Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. The mechanical warrior entered the room, his glowing core pulsing steadily. From the deck above, the Submerger could hear Captain Gaylord's loud voice carrying through the ship. "If that fishman doesn't start talking soon, I say we waterboard him." "That's what real pirates do, right?" The Submerger's eyes narrowed. Submerger stopped in front of the bars. Without a word, the machine began its work, methodical, emotionless, and unrelenting. Electrical shocks, crushing pressure on joints. Ice-cold water blasted directly into his face. No matter what Submerger did, the Submerger refused to break. He endured the pain in silence, red eyes burning with defiance. After what felt like hours, the door opened again. Hammerhand stepped inside, his mechanical hammer hand clenched at his side. He watched the scene for a moment before raising his hand. "That's enough." Submerger immediately stopped and stepped back. Hammerhand stared coldly at his former friend through the bars. "We don't have time for this. If you won't tell us what we need to know, then we'll just kill every fucking fish person in our way until we get the last fruit of Eden." The Submerger's expression twisted with anger and sorrow. "You've become a monster, Elias." Hammerhand turned away without another word. "Submerger, leave him. We'll deal with him later." The mechanical warrior obeyed, following his creator out of the brig and locking the door behind them. Alone in the dark cell once more, the Submerger leaned his head back against the wall, breathing heavily. His old friend was gone, and the war he had feared was about to begin. The journey north was long and miserable. The Wet Dream sailed for many cold nights through freezing waters. Ice floes grew larger and more frequent, until finally the ship could go no farther. The sea had become a solid white wasteland. Hammerhand stood at the bow, staring out at the endless ice. "This is as far as the ship goes," he said. "We continue on foot from here." He gathered the main fighting force, himself, Amarita, Afromaniac, Octobandit, and Submerger. Only Captain Gaylord and No Luck were left behind to guard the Wet Dream. "Keep the ship safe," Hammerhand ordered. "We'll return with the fruit." Pegleg saluted dramatically. "You can count on us, Hammerhand. We'll be ready." No Luck just grunted and adjusted his eye patch. The landing party stepped onto the thick ice and began their long march. The wind howled around them, biting through their clothes. They walked for what felt like forever, hours blending into one frozen blur of white. Finally, Amarita raised her hand, stopping the group. "This is the spot," she said quietly, her breath visible in the freezing air. "I can feel it. The barrier is thinnest here." Hammerhand nodded. He turned to Submerger. "Do it." The mechanical warrior took several steps back, then charged forward. With tremendous force, Submerger leaped into the air and slammed down onto the ice with both fists. Crack! The thick ice shattered violently. A massive hole opened up, revealing dark, churning water below. Without hesitation, Submerger dove straight down into the depths, heading toward King Underar's underwater throne. Hammerhand looked at the rest of the group, his mechanical hand glowing with power. "Let's get what we came for." Back on the Wet Dream, Captain Gaylord and No Luck stood at the railing, watching the hole in the distance. Pegleg scratched his head. "You think they'll be all right, No Luck?" No Luck slowly shrugged, his hooks clinking together. Neither of them had any idea what kind of hell their crew had just got them into. Captain Pegleg Gaylord and No Luck were growing bored. With the rest of the crew gone, the two geniuses decided they should try to get information out of their prisoner. They marched down to the brig with great purpose. "All right, fishman," Pegleg shouted, pointing dramatically. "Tell us everything you know about this King Underar and his treasure, or we'll do something really bad to you." The Submerger, still chained but far from broken, looked up at the two idiots and smirked. "You call this idiot the captain?" he said, his voice dripping with contempt. If he was a real captain, he would have made me walk the plank the moment I was captured. But no. Here you are playing pirate while your so-called crew does all the real work. Pegleg's face turned bright red. No Luck tilted his head, as if actually considering the insult. That was the final straw. That's it, Pegleg roared. You're walking the plank. No one insults Captain Gaylord on his own ship. With great effort, the two of them dragged the Submerger up to the main deck. Pegleg proudly made him stand at the edge of a hastily placed plank, pressing his sword into the hybrid's back. Any last words, you overgrown guppy? Pegleg sneered. The Submerger looked over his shoulder, completely unfazed. You're both morons. With a dramatic shove from Pegleg, the Submerger walked the plank and splashed into the freezing water below. Pegleg and No Luck cheered and high-fived, well, more like hook-fived. Ha, that showed him, Pegleg boasted. Real pirate justice. Underwater, the Submerger calmly twisted his wrists. The bindings were nothing to him once he was back in his true element. With a powerful flick of his tail, he broke free and shot off into the depths like a torpedo, heading straight toward King Underar's domain to warn them. On the surface, Pegleg wiped his hands together proudly. Problem solved. Let's go have a drink, No Luck. No Luck grunted in agreement, completely unaware they had just released their most valuable prisoner back into the ocean. Deep beneath the Arctic ice, Submerger descended like a metal predator. The moment he entered King Underar's territory, the Morentities attacked. Dozens of warriors charged him with tridents and spears. Submerger tore through them with cold efficiency. His powerful mechanical fists shattered weapons and bones alike. Energy blasts from his core lit up the dark water, sending Morentities flying in all directions. He wasn't struggling, not even close. No matter how many defenders swarmed him, none of them would reveal the location of the last fruit of Eden. They fought to the death rather than betray their king. Then the water itself seemed to tremble. Orcarnage burst through the fray like a living torpedo, massive, furious, and roaring with rage. The orca-like guardian slammed into Submerger with terrifying force, sending the mechanical warrior crashing into a coral formation. The two titans clashed in a brutal underwater brawl. Orcarnage was pure savage power, biting, slamming his massive tail, and raking with razor-sharp claws. Submerger answered with mechanical precision and overwhelming strength. His hammer-like fists pounded into Orcarnage's sides. Energy beams scorched the water. The two giants traded devastating blows, cracking stone pillars and shaking the seabed. For a moment, it looked like Orcarnage might overwhelm the machine with raw fury, but Submerger was built for this. He grabbed Orcarnage by the throat with one hand and unleashed a point-blank energy blast from his chest core. The explosion sent the Guardian spiraling backward, badly wounded and gasping. Submerger hovered over him, raising his massive bladed hand for the killing blow. Wait, Orcarnage growled, holding up a clawed hand. Spare me and I'll tell you everything. Submerger paused, his glowing core pulsing steadily. Orcarnage spat blood into the water. The fruit King Underar keeps it in his personal vault at the heart of the throne chamber. Submerger lowered his hand. He had what he needed. Without another word, the mechanical warrior turned and swam deeper into the kingdom, heading straight for the king. Back on the frozen surface, Hammerhand and Amarita stood together, peering through a magical-looking glass that showed them everything Submerger was seeing below. The rest of the crew, Octobandit and Afromaniac, huddled miserably around a small, pathetic fire on the ice. Suddenly, the ice cracked violently. The Submerger exploded upward from the water like a missile, landing hard on the frozen surface in a spray of seawater that instantly turned to ice. Octobandit and Afromaniac immediately moved to block his path to Hammerhand, weapons drawn. You're not getting to him, Octobandit snarled, twirling her cutlasses. The fight was fierce and fast, charged first, throwing powerful punches. The Submerger dodged with fluid grace and countered with devastating strikes, sending the big man sliding across the ice. Octobandit attacked from the side with blinding speed, her blades flashing. The Submerger parried with his bare arms, using his superior strength and aquatic agility to outmaneuver her. He grabbed one of her swords mid-swing and used it to fling her into Afromaniac. Both warriors hit the ice hard. The Submerger stood tall, breathing heavily but victorious. Now only Hammerhand remained between him and the hole in the ice. The two former friends stared each other down in silence. Before either could move, Amarita attacked. She unleashed a barrage of crimson blood magic, sending tendrils of dark energy whipping toward the Submerger. He dodged and charged, the two clashing in a storm of magic and raw power. Amarita was fast and ruthless, using illusions and blood curses, but the Submerger's hybrid nature made him resistant to her magic. He powered through her attacks, landing a brutal uppercut that lifted her off the ice. With one final strike, he knocked her unconscious. Amrita collapsed onto the snow. The Submerger turned back toward Hammerhand, but Hammerhand was already gone. In his place stood a sleek, advanced diving suit, one of his own designs. Before the Submerger could reach him, Hammerhand dove into the hole in the ice and vanished into the dark waters below, heading straight for King Underar's kingdom. The Submerger roared in frustration and dove in after him. Deep in the heart of King Underar's underwater kingdom, chaos had erupted. Submerger tore through the final wave of defenders like a metal hurricane. Spears shattered against his armor. Elite Morenity warriors were swatted aside like minnows. Nothing could slow him down. He burst into the Grand Throne Room with overwhelming force. King Underar rose from his throne, red eyes blazing with fury. "You dare invade my domain, machine." The two titans clashed instantly. The fight was brutal. Submerger's mechanical strength and energy blasts met Underar's ancient power and mastery of the sea. The king summoned crushing currents and hurled massive shards of ice and coral. Submerger answered with devastating hammer strikes and glowing energy beams that lit up the entire throne room. Pillars cracked. The water itself boiled from the intensity of their battle. For a moment, it looked like Submerger would win. He had King Underar on the defensive, backing the ancient ruler toward his own throne. But then a new figure shot into the throne room like a torpedo. The Submerger had arrived. Without hesitation, he attacked Submerger from the side. The two creations, one born of flesh and ocean, the other of metal and magic, collided in a ferocious duel. They traded blows that shook the seabed. The Submerger used his superior agility and natural strength in water to outmaneuver the machine, dodging energy blasts and landing heavy strikes. Submerger fought back with cold precision, but the Submerger was fighting for something deeper. With a roar, the Submerger grabbed Submerger by the head, spun him around, and slammed him into the throne room floor. Before the machine could recover, the Submerger reached into his chest and ripped out the glowing magical core with both hands. Submerger's body spasmed once, then went dark and limp. King Underar cowered behind his throne, eyes wide with shock and fear as he watched one of his greatest threats fall. The Submerger stood over the defeated machine, breathing heavily, the stolen core still glowing in his hands. King Underar, still cowering behind his throne, suddenly began to laugh, a deep, mocking laugh that echoed through the throne room. "So the little freak returns to save the king," he sneered. Submerger glared at him, fists clenched. "I didn't come here to save you. I came to stop my old friend from making the same mistake I warned him about years ago." The two began arguing bitterly, years of pain and rejection spilling out. Until finally, in a moment of cruel honesty, King Underar laughed again and revealed the truth. "You still don't know, do you? I was the one who took advantage of your mother that night on the beach. You are my blood, a disgusting mistake I never wanted." The Submerger froze. Rage filled him like never before. The final fight was savage. King Underar unleashed the full power of the ocean, crushing currents, spears of ice, and dark magic. The Submerger fought with pure fury, dodging and countering with devastating strength. The two clashed in a whirlwind of violence, cracking the throne room itself. In the end, the Submerger overpowered the ancient king. With a roar, he grabbed Underar by the throat, lifted him high, and executed him with a brutal strike, ending the long reign of the ocean's tyrant. Breathing heavily, the Submerger took the glowing last fruit of Eden from its sacred resting place. He placed King Underar's crown on his own head. At that moment, Hammerhand burst into the throne room in his advanced diving suit. "That is supposed to be mine," he roared, charging forward. The Submerger simply sidestepped the attack with graceful ease and calmly poked a small hole in Hammerhand's breathing tank. Air began to bubble out rapidly. Hammerhand froze as the realization hit him he didn't have enough air to make it back to the surface. Defeated, he slowly sat down on the throne. The two old friends looked at each other in silence as the air slowly left Hammerhand's suit. They talked quietly about their lost friendship, their parents, the pain, the mistakes. No anger left, just two broken men who once found comfort in each other. Eventually, Hammerhand ran out of air. He slumped forward, lifeless on the throne. The Submerger closed his eyes for a long moment. Then the surviving Morentities began emerging from hiding. The Submerger braced himself for more insults. Instead, Orcarnage was the first to kneel. One by one, the rest of the Morentities followed, bowing before their new king. For the first time in his life, the Submerger was finally accepted. The waters in the throne room began to swirl and rise on their own, forming a towering, majestic shape. A being of flowing water and crystalline light took form, massive wings spread wide. "I am Waterous," the angel declared, his voice echoing like crashing waves. "Watcher of this kingdom, I am the one who entrusted the last fruit of Eden to King Underra long ago, and I see now that was a grave mistake." Waterous turned his glowing eyes toward the Submerger. "I hope leaving it in your care will not prove to be another. There are powers far greater than I who would use it for terrible harm. Will you accept this burden?" The Submerger, still wearing the crown, looked down at the glowing fruit in his hands. After a long moment, he nodded. "I accept." Waterous paused suddenly, as if sensing something far away. "I sense a bloodline I have not felt in ages," and with that, the angel vanished in a swirl of water and light. Back on the surface, Amarita slowly woke up aboard the Wet Dream. Octobandit and Afromaniac had carried her back to the ship after the battle on the ice. The vessel was in chaos. Captain Pegleg Gaylord was stomping around the deck in his half-torn dress and wig, barking orders at everyone. "No one is listening to me," he yelled. "I am the captain." Even No Luck had tuned him out, casually sharpening his hooks. Suddenly, a massive wave rose from the ocean, towering over the ship, only to stop inches from slamming into it. The water formed into the majestic figure of Waterous. The angel's glowing eyes locked directly onto Amarita. "You child of Lilith, I request that you come with me." Amarita blinked in confusion. "Me? Yes, you and your sisters have a greater role to play in the coming war. It is time to prepare." Amarita hesitated for only a moment before taking the angel's outstretched hand. In a swirl of water and light, the two of them vanished from the deck. This was the final straw for Captain Gaylord. "Anyone else want to fucking leave?" he screamed, pointing at the plank. "The plank is right there." "No, all right then." He adjusted his wig with dignity. "Let's get this ship moving. We've got actual pirate shit to do." The Wet Dream turned away from the frozen north and sailed off toward its next chaotic adventure with a much smaller but still completely ridiculous crew.